let's just start out with by talking about how does radicalization or extremism occur? How do these groups proselytize their message, operate? Who are they looking for? How do they direct and project their hate? Then we can get into ideologies, because that's certainly a big component of it, whether it's radical Islam or domestic homegrown extremist groups or individuals.
So, well, Tony, you probably know I've interviewed about 800 terrorists, most of them militant jihadists, and now it's 51 white supremacist militia group members and 5 Antifa. And it's really interesting to me that I think the original theory that I developed still holds true across all of these groups. Oh, and one abortion clinic terrorist. Is that there's 4 things that make a terrorist. So there's almost always a group. Occasionally you'll get somebody that acts without a group. And that would be like the Unabomber. He was a really smart guy. I think he was a math professor and, capable of figuring out how to make a bomb, write his own ideology. But the group functions to give you a sense of belonging, to weaponize you, to give you an ideology, to tell you what to target, when to target, how to do it. So the group's really important. Then the second thing is the ideology. And we know this even with our military members, that we have to teach them how to kill, because people won't generally kill other human beings, except maybe those that they're closely related to. But they won't normally kill human beings unless they're convinced of the righteousness of it. So the ideology, in almost all cases, argues some kind of defensive mechanism. So defense, the election was stolen for January 6th, or defending democracy, even though they're really assaulting democracy. For ISIS and Al-Qaeda, defending Muslims. For abortion clinic terrorists, or defending unborn babies. And now for Antifa affiliates who are violent, we're making sure that fascism doesn't take over. And for white supremacists, we're fighting white genocide and white replacement. So there's the group, the ideology. Then the third thing is some kind of social support. And all of us, we're social human beings, and we look in a looking glass of other people. And when we see approval, then we tend to do those things. And when we see disapproval, we may avoid the things, or at least do them in secret. And so when there's high social support for joining a group, it makes it a lot easier to join. And so nowadays, social support comes over the internet. So you can very quickly convene a group around a whole bunch of people, or a whole bunch of people around an individual. So we saw with ISIS that people would be very quickly surrounded by ISIS members that might be in Syria, Iraq, anywhere in the world. And they might be talking, somebody in London, come to Syria, or you should do a revenge attack for us on the streets in Europe. And social support is really meaningful. Then the fourth thing is, what is inside of yourself? What are your individual motivations and vulnerabilities? So do you need to belong? Do you have problems in your life that you need to escape from? In the case of ISIS, Syria was a great geographical escape. And do you want some monetary benefit? Are you looking for a sense of significance? Do you want to build an Islamic caliphate? In the case of white supremacism, are you feeling bad about yourself? And does it really sound good to you to find out that you're an elite group and that you should be the rulers, and that there's this other group that's warring against you and trying to put minorities in your place? And it's not your fault. The failures in your life are not your fault. It's the fault of the Jews. So, whatever in the group and the ideology resonates to your individual needs, that's what will move you along the terrorist trajectory. And as far as how they recruit, well, the the more emotionally evocative you can make your propaganda, the more useful it is usually, because people lose their critical thinking skills when things are really emotional. And so if you can show something that violates sacred values, so for a Muslim, if you can show a Muslim woman that was raped by the US forces, for instance, that would be that'd get a lot of people really enraged and to move into action. And with white supremacists, they'll show maybe immigration statistics and say, the Democrats are trying to replace all of you. They're trying to keep themselves in power through immigration. Abortion clinic terrorist, they would talk about unborn babies and show you pictures of destroyed fetuses and embryos and, how human they look. So it just depends on the group. But all of that is happening over the internet. It used to be face-to-face. It used to be that groups recruited on the ground, and they still do. They still do all the time. But a lot of this, you don't have to go with pictures anymore and show them to people, and you don't have to risk the security of your terrorist group by recruiting on the ground. You just can do it over the internet. And what ISIS learned with the advent of social media is you could just blanket the internet, and then you could sit back and wait and see who responds to it. So, it was kind of like a self-selecting mechanism that really benefited ISIS of, I reach 1 billion people and I wait for the 100 that respond, and then I work real hard on them. I swarm them and love bomb them and move them very quickly along the terrorist trajectory. And other groups have figured this out as well now. And we see deplatforming, but we also see platforms that allow extremist content and encrypted apps. It's impossible to know what's going across them.
Do you find a difference in the education of, say, Islamist extremists? Because a lot of them have had advanced degrees, engineers, doctors. A difference between their education and, say, white supremacists or homegrown people who go to the extreme or violent extremism?
We don't have a random sample, so it's hard to say, but I can tell you that it looks to me like with the homegrown hate, the white supremacists, that they're less educated, that they're coming from really difficult backgrounds where there's drug addiction, there's broken homes or homes that were never complete. So there's missing people in their lives, important people. There's violence in their homes, a lot of drug use that, they've been exposed to drug use and then they themselves use drugs. So in our sample of 51, we found a lot of lost souls and people that really could have benefited from some kind of psychological social work intervention, particularly in their early childhood when they were getting abused. I didn't find that with ISIS. We have 273 ISIS interviews, and there certainly would be cases where there was family conflict and maybe wanting to escape conflict or escape an oppressive family. These are generally somewhat conservative Muslims, but not always. A lot of times it's converts or reverts. But, then the tension comes when someone young has taken a conservative view of Islam or a takfir view of Islam, and their parents don't, then there's tensions in that regard. But I definitely, our ISIS sample was more educated, but I don't know. I mean, I think the people you're referencing are the leaders of Al-Qaeda, and yeah, they were doctors and engineers and, really, really educated people. The leaders of the white supremacists, it varies. Stuart Rhodes of the Oath Keepers went to Yale and was a lawyer, although he wasn't a practicing lawyer or wasn't practicing out in the Northwest. Um, mm, I'm thinking of some of the other leaders. Jeff Shoup, the leader of the NSM. These are all U.S. based. He was finished his GED. That was it. But smart guy, really smart guy. T.M. Garrett, who now works for us, didn't finish a formal college education. He finished some kind of apprenticeship in Germany, but also a smart guy, very smart, and capable of translating Ku Klux Klan in English and Christian identity ideology into German. So a lot of the leaders are really smart guys and entrepreneurial, and they know how to manage people, but they're not, for the most part, from what I've seen, educated. But I haven't surveyed all the groups and looked at that issue. That's an interesting question. But I would say with white supremacism, I see a lot of shifting blame. Like we've identified this process that we call directed hate, and you join a group. What we found, the number 3 reasons for joining white supremacism in our sample were not racism. They were wanting a sense of belonging, wanting a sense of significance, and wanting some kind of noble purpose. So they fell into these groups because they were being bullied, and the group promised protection to them because it just happened upon them, and they took them in because they were white. But in a short period of time, they realized, or they might have sought them out because they thought they were cool in some way, tough guys, that they could feel an affinity to. But in a very short period of time, they were exposed to the ideology, told to read certain books, to study certain things. And so they had this feeling of, I'm special because I'm white. I belong to an elite group. And not only that, I'm let in on secret knowledge, esoteric knowledge. And I'm beginning to learn that the world isn't as I think it is. So my failures in life, and they had many failures in life, are not my fault. They're the fault of the Jews, because minorities are going to replace us. There's a white genocide that's underfoot, and this is all orchestrated by the Jews. Therefore, I have 2 enemies: the minorities that are going to try to replace us, and above them, the Jews that are orchestrating it. So most of these people never met a Jew in their life, but became Jew haters. And they had met minorities, but there is some theories by other people that study this in this field that say there has to be some kind of triggering event, a bad experience with minorities. And that wasn't the case in our sample. There were definitely some cases of bad experiences with minorities, but it was more that they were taught that these guys are below you. And they liked that. They liked that feeling of, yeah, now I know who I am. I'm significant. And the reason that I couldn't get ahead in life is because these other people were plotting against me and against my family. And now I have to do everything I can in a defensive sense to defend my people. And then the third step is that they go so far into it that they realize they have to seclude themselves from other groups, cut off all ties, isolate themselves, and put up with the violence, if not take part in it. So on one level, endorse the violence.
Among your study group, Ann, have you had opportunity to talk to or interview any of the folks who were at the January 6th? I'll call it what it is, an insurrection.
Yeah, I talked to Josh Pruitt. He was one of the Proud Boys, and I talked to him very shortly after he was arrested. Sorry, I'm pouring some water. And he basically said, well, he fell into it from wanting a sense of belonging. He started going to the MAGA marches, and he was a back the blue kind of guy. He was a bartender, and the cops would come into his bar. He liked them. He said he never thought of himself as racist, wasn't interested in being a racist. He lived here in DC. DC is a predominantly Black town, and said he had good relationships with Black people. He had dated a woman of color. he said he's never been a racist, but when he went to the MAGA march, they went out drinking after, and he got jumped by who he labeled as Antifa. And he said the Proud Boys came and rescued him, and they all fought together and they won. And then he said the Proud Boys remembered him. He's a big bodybuilder, weightlifter type, so he's a good fighter, of course. And then in the second MAGA march, Enrique Tarrio inducted him into the Proud Boys. And he said it was on a video because it was Enrique doing it.
I'm not going to sympathize with them.
He said suddenly he got all this hate from other people that were calling him a racist. And he said, how did I join a racist group when a Puerto Rican black guy is inducting me into it? So Josh isn't stupid. He's not stupid by any means, but he's like a little kid in a big man's body. And he goes along. He, as a kid, watched his mother overdose on heroin and grew up in chaotic circumstances. And I think there's nothing that means more to him than belonging and, you know, feeling a sense of significance with a group. So when the Proud Boys adopted him, he was so happy to be with them. And he stupidly started following all kinds of QAnon videos. He was looking to news sources. He would send me things after I interviewed him. He would send me things and say, what do you think about this? I think it was really a false flag operation. I think it was Antifa. And, you know, they just wanted to trap us at the Capitol. And I would say, you know, have you vetted your news source? And he sent me QAnon videos that showed that the day of reckoning was about to happen and that there were nooses all around Washington. So he really believed this stuff. But I don't think because he's a stupid man. I think it's more because you get sucked down a rabbit hole. And if everybody around you is believing it, then, you know, if you're that kind of person and you need to belong, you go with the flow. And he definitely believed that he was defending against a stolen election. And he didn't understand, and probably because no one had explained it to him and they had explained the opposite to him, including Trump himself, that he said he couldn't understand how the vote turned late at night or early in the morning. But, you know, the way people vote across party lines, everybody knew that's in the know knew that was going to happen, that the Democratic votes would come in later, be counted later. But he just couldn't understand that. And to him, it had to be fraud.
What about domestically, the religious backgrounds and upbringing?
Well, there's different ideologies that go with white supremacism and militias, but KKK, some of the small militias follow something called Christian identity. And Christian identity posits that there's a one-seed theory and the two-seed theory. So the two-seed theory is really disgusting, that when Adam and Eve had their first child, it was their child, but their second child, Cain, was the result of Eve's union with the serpent who tempted her. So, and that's the Jews. So Cain was the first Jew, and Jews forever have enmity against white people. And they use all kinds of evidence in the Bible that I can't remember who it is, blushes, and you can't blush. Maybe it was Adam blushed about his nakedness after they, fell out of grace in the biblical story, and only a white person can blush. And but anyway, so if they either believe that in the one seed theory, white people were from Adam and Eve, but Black people and people of color existed, but they were just with the animals, and including the Jews. So, and God gave white people, according to this interpretation of the Bible, dominion over all the animals. So either way, white people are the true people of God and the people that have the right to rule this earth. So whenever something gets mixed into normal tenets of established faith, it usually has really strong power. Because, if you're a Christian and you believe, wow, Christianity teaches this, and but it's not everybody in white supremacism that believes that. A lot of white supremacists follow Odinism or Wotanism, which is believing in Norse gods, and they'll say to a Christian, your God is held on sticks. He's weak, where our gods are powerful, and the whole thing is about valor and fighting force. And again, it's for Northern Europeans, so it's seen as a religion for white people.
Does this tread into the territory of what's being called Christian nationalism?
Well, no, I think Christian nationalists are probably something else, but I'm sure some of them are also white supremacists. But I think Christian nationalism is, I don't know. That's not something I've really studied really well, but I would say what I do know about Christian Americans is that a lot of them are really puritanical. A lot of them are very conservative. So they're having a lot of trouble with this whole LGBT Q phenomena. They don't like drag queen story hour. They don't like the idea that trans kids are being treated at a very young age when they're still figuring out their sexuality and their gender identity, and they would label that as sin. So then you're treading on sacred values, and I think that there are Christians that would feel you can move me to violence, and they're also against abortion, a lot of them. So an abortion clinic terrorist would, if he was, I'm not saying people that are against abortion endorse this, but an abortion clinic terrorist would say, I have the right to bomb that clinic. I have the right to kill that doctor, because in that clinic, under that doctor's hands, hundreds of lives are being taken every week, because they believe that unborn life is human life and should have the same moral and legal value as your life or mine.
Mm-hmm.
And they appoint themselves to be the enforcers, but they appoint themselves to be the enforcers in the absence of a legal process that would do the protection for them. And that's why we're having this huge upheaval in our country right now, because we've never really worked through what are sensible abortion laws. We've always relied on Roe v. Wade. I'm not exactly sure what the term Christian nationalist means, and it probably means lots of things to many people. But I think we're going to see huge fights with Christian nationalists that will say they don't want any abortion whatsoever. But when we start really debating these things and making laws, I think there's going to be a middle ground that starts to say, oh, when a 10-year-old's raped, when it's incest, I don't know. When the baby would have died anyway, and a painful death, or before the heartbeat. It remains to be seen. But both sides are getting crazy over it, because in the Antifa interviews that I just recently made, the 5 that I talked to said that they were willing to destroy property over this issue. And they were willing to attack churches, and they were willing to attack pregnancy resource centers, which is basically saying, in the absence of a law that protects women's bodily autonomy, I define that as fascism, and I appoint myself as the enforcer, and I'm willing to use property violence, at least, to enforce my view. and we need to have confidence in our electoral process. But I think what Trump did for, it was at least 6 months, wasn't he? Predicting that the election, that if he lost, it would be fraud, and when he did lose, that it was fraud. He really eroded a lot of people's belief in the electoral process. And there's also an erosion in the belief in the press. We have such a polarization with the press that now people don't know what's what, and they don't know what to believe.
What I wanted to ask you next was among the homegrown extremists, the white nationalists, everything else we've been talking about, homegrown, do most of them, or do you find segments of them leaning more towards the conspiracy hypotheses, like the QAnon conspiracies or 9/11? Does that seem to run through these groups as well, or do you find it in one group more than another?
I think the conspiracy theories run across all the groups, and they also run with ISIS and Al Qaeda. And, there's always a conspiracy theory that's helping to fuel the ideology. So, ISIS and Al Qaeda, it was Muslims are under attack, the West hates Islam, we have to defend Islam, and this is the way to do it, the head of the snake. But with white supremacists, it's white genocide, white replacement. Some of them are following QAnon. And then the whole idea of Rahowa, which is racial holy war, is at some point there needs to be a civil war. And the whites are going to fight the minorities, and they're going to round everybody up in racial holy war, Rahowa. And they're going to have the Day of the Rope, which is everybody that's a liberal, a race traitor, was part of what they call Zionist organized government, ZOG, will be hung. And that fits into QAnon. I don't know if QAnon designed it that way, but they talk about the Day of the Reckoning. And again, all the liberals, the cabal, the people that are claimed to be predators of children, to either have an extended lifetime by eating their adrenochrome or using them for sex, they'll all be hung on the Day of Reckoning. So QAnon and white supremacism, there's overlap, definitely. And Oath Keepers and trying to think, some of the militias that were in Idaho were believing that the Obama government was going to round up all the far right and put them into decommissioned Walmarts. And these would be like in China, they would be re-education centers. They believe that everybody that's anti-fascist, that affiliates with Antifa and comes out and counter-protests them, want to bring communism to the US. And certainly among the Antifa affiliates, there are communists, but not all of them. There's just a lot of people that just don't like white supremacism and don't like fascism. So, yeah, there's the conspiracy theories are running rampant. I mean, Alex Jones had a new one every month, didn't he?
Yeah, just about.
Yeah, I mean, the Sandy Hook wasn't real, that it was all staged. So you can't trust anything. You go down a rabbit hole where you just trust the people that you're following because they somehow know the truth and you don't.
As a psychiatrist and psychologist, have you? I personally have a hard time understanding how these people can believe these conspiracy. I'm not even going to give them the credit of saying theories. They're hypotheses as far as I'm concerned. Is it education? Is it their religion. I mean, I just can't understand how they can believe things like that.
I think it has to fit with some need inside of yourself. I mean, I always say nobody joins a terrorist or an extremist group that it doesn't meet their needs. So if you're failing in your life and we had a punk skinhead female in our sample, and she said, I was always told minorities are trying to take my job, and that there are enemies and that Jews are behind it. And she had a child and divorced, and her mother was helping her to raise the kid, I think in Oklahoma, actually. And she said, if I didn't have my mother help me take care of my child, I'd never make ends meet. And not everybody has that. She said it dawned on her one day, working at Walmart, I'm not getting paid a fair wage. And that's why I have problems. It's not because, she said, I've never been replaced by a minority ever. And but we're all in the same boat. We're not being paid fairly. We can't afford our lives. But not everyone is able to get to figuring out what's really going on. They just know they're having struggles in their lives, and someone comes along and gives them an explanation. And with QAnon and the whole sexual cabal thing, we know that I think it's close to 1 out of 5 children are molested as children, and most of those kids never tell anybody. And if you're molested as a child, usually your molester tells you, I'll kill your puppy, I'll kill your parents, I'll kill you, some really horrible threat, really fearful thing, so that you do keep it inside and you carry this pain, shame, and fear around your whole life. And then if you get on the internet and you hear, oh, there's all kinds of molesters out there hurting children, just imagine what that can fire up inside of you. So this guy that went to stop Pizzagate, I think he's probably a really nice guy. And, I would love to know, maybe he was molested and, wanted to make sure that other kids didn't suffer his fate. Poor guy. And, that he went crashing into Pizzagate with a gun, or into the pizza place, thinking he was going to liberate molested children. But, when I first heard about QAnon, I thought, oh, yeah, they're going to tap into this whole group of people that were molested. They also tap into people that believe, and this has been going on for probably 40 years, the claim that there's some kind of one world governance coming about, and
which that's been floating around for decades and decades.
Yeah, and
a lot of these conspiracy hypotheses, they're not new.
Right. And that's, the Jews are trying to take over, George Soros. We're going to lose our government. We're not going to be able to have our rights. And as Christians, we need to oppose this. So they tap into this whole Christian far right, who, also maybe aren't bad people. They just don't understand what it means to, that the Hague has, wants us to sign on to human rights and things like that. And they think, no, we're going to lose our sovereignty. And, it's just, but the people that preach these kind of things, they're getting a reward for preaching it. Alex Jones made millions. Stuart Rhodes, that ran the Oath Keepers, he would go with the wind. He wasn't the guy we just interviewed, Jason Van Tatenhove, who also gave his testimony to Congress. He's openly queer. And he said that Stuart Rhodes knew that, and they had other people working for them that were gay, and Stuart Rhodes knew it. He never kicked any of them out. He needed them, and he actually liked them. He went to live with Jason, I think, for 3 months.
Interesting.
And when he needed a place to stay, I think after his marriage broke up. And but Jason said, he would figure out what would get him the most donations. So if he would court the far right and the alt right, then he would get a lot of donations. So he would just go with whatever brought him money. And I think a lot of these guys are like that.
Yeah, there are certainly opportunists within all of these homegrown factions. That's for sure, and they seem to be preying on a certain segments of society that they know that they can reach, who will buy into this or buy into whatever the conspiracy is that they're peddling. And now it seems like under QAnon, they've brought all of these, every conspiracy imaginable.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say every white supremacist or militia member is following QAnon. But yeah, QAnon has become an umbrella for everything. But I asked our research intern, Warren Wilson, this past summer. I said, how about spending a summer inside QAnon and we'll write a paper about it. So he's a white boy, and he picked some Confederate general's name. He told me, but I don't remember it now. And he said, he knew that this would be, he's in the South, that he knew that this would be a good screen name to use. And he joined all these white supremacist QAnon forums. And then we tracked together what they were talking about. And there was definitely overlap between them. And, they would be talking about, when the day of reckoning comes, then we'll rise back up. And I just talked to somebody that was Antifa, and he told me that he worked in a gun shop in the South, not the deep South, but southern parts. He didn't want me to tell where he lived. But he said he just got terrified because guys would come in asking, when can we finally shoot the liberals? I mean, there are a lot of signs that we could have a civil war. And, I hope it's a civil war if it ever comes to that between, crazy fringe groups and it's quickly put down. But, people are arming up. The Antifa guys told me that in self-defense, they were arming up. And, that's a bad, bad situation. And both sides saying, I don't trust law enforcement. I don't trust the federal government.
That's interesting. So not only would it be a fight among these groups, but they would also be battling law enforcement. I mean, state and local and federal.
I don't know if they would be battling law enforcement, but they don't trust them to protect them. The white supremacists try to infiltrate law enforcement. So yes. That's really interesting with what happened in the last week or two. We had the Senate come out with their NDAA, which I guess still has to pass the House, but they instructed the DOD to stop all the work on extremism in the military. Mm-hmm. And the House, by contrast, required the DOD to put out, I think it's an annual report on extremism, how many people they've kicked out of the ranks, things like that. And our center has been asked by Department of Defense to help work on this issue. Right after January 6th, they asked us, could you do something like you did for ISIS? Because I don't know if you realize this, Tony, but all the interviews that I do the interviewing. And so all the ISIS interviews, all the white supremacists, I did them on video. And I always ask everybody after, would you allow me to use this video to make a counter-narrative if they're not in it still, or if they're disillusioned of their group? So we already have, at the time they called us, we had like 6 or 7 videos already made. And they said, could you do something like what you did to fight ISIS? With ISIS, we have 250 videos made. And I should credit the Embassy of Qatar because they funded that project. It's called Breaking the ISIS Brand. And I should also credit Facebook because Facebook helped us to put those videos out in 27 different languages all over the world where ISIS was recruiting. And now we're trying to do the same thing with the white supremacist those campaigns are called Escape Hate, so that you catch people early on when they're thinking about joining of, here's a real person that was in the group, don't join. It didn't work out for them. It wasn't the dream they thought it would be. All that belonging, significance, and noble purpose was garbage.
Have you been able to, in any way, been able to gather metrics on how well these counter-narrative campaigns and work? Have been successful?
We publish on it all the time, so you can look on our website. And what we find is that the videos, we've only successfully studied the Breaking the ISIS brand videos at this point, and we're starting the Escape Hate, and we just don't have enough data to have good confidence. And everything, when you start it, you're kind of trying to figure out, can you reach your target audience? And the first video that we put out, Molly Ellenberg, our research fellow, runs all the Facebook campaigns. And Molly said, that was my favorite video. It was a video of a guy named Ryan Lowry. But Ryan left, I think it was Aryan Brotherhood or Aryan Nations, the skinheads. No, Rolling Wood skinheads. He left them. He ended up in prison. He reformed himself and he got into politics, but he went a bit on the leftist side. And we found that he wasn't a good messenger to message to people that are thinking about joining white supremacism, because they hate anybody on the left. And so now we're trying out a different video. And I think we have 30 or 40 made. And we definitely track all the stats. We track how long did they watch it. And with ISIS, we learned when we campaigned with 5-minute videos, we'd get a lot of engagement on watch. But if we switched it down to a 1-minute video, which I'm not the biggest fan of our 1-minute videos because they don't tell the story completely, but we would get total watches. And the more total watches you get, the better. We also watch, did they share it? Did they comment on it? What were their comments? So all the metrics that are available to us from a Facebook campaign, we analyze and look at it. So we're very confident that we get engagement and that our videos are watched and that they seem to have the effect of making people think about these issues and discuss them openly on the internet. On YouTube, we found, we also tracked, again, the Breaking the ISIS brand, and we found that people would more openly say that they endorsed ISIS on YouTube than they would on Facebook. I think it's more anonymous on YouTube. And, we got comments like, we're coming back, or this is a CIA product, things like that. But we also got comments of, that seemed thoughtful of, maybe this group isn't who we think it is.
Other than those kind of metrics, are you able to give any kind of demographics on like age and
well, we pick the ages, and we pick the ages because the way we campaign on Facebook is through ads. So we always go for the ages that we think are involved. So with ISIS, I believe we picked the ages 15 to 40. And with white supremacism, I think we went a bit older because there are quite a few older guys in it. And then, we pick interest groups that or languages if we're on a global campaign. Right now with white supremacism, we're campaigning just in the US. And so we look for interest groups like gun ownership would be one. Or I don't remember what the interest groups are, but they seem to be getting us to the target audience. And Facebook also tells us their analysis of what they think's going on. They've hired a consultant for us to help us.
Is there anything that they've found that you can share that stands out?
With ISIS, one of the things that we learned to do was to figure out who was affiliated, who had been exposed to ISIS propaganda. So we were able to figure that out. And if we specifically targeted those people, they watched our videos longer than just a general ad campaign, which is a really good sign. So the people that you definitely want to watch them. I should say that one of the things that we do in both campaigns is we name our videos to look like they came from the other side. So an ISIS video would be named The Glorious Cubs of the Caliphate, giving my bayah to Baghdadi. A white supremacism one might be named Black People Are Not Our Friends. And they have a thumbnail that is from white supremacist or ISIS propaganda. So the idea is to look like, so somebody that's already engaging with that kind of propaganda will engage with ours and get a really different message. But this isn't a whole answer. These kind of things require whole of society answers. So, if you were going to ask me what will make homegrown hate diminish, I would say we definitely need good mental health interventions early on. We're missing a lot of kids that are abused and neglected. We need to do more about bullying. We need to have exit ramps for people that get in Germany, Norway, Sweden, most of the countries, they have exit programs. They're actually named Exit. Tori Borgo started that. And they're very comprehensive, and they're paid for mostly by government. So if you want to exit, they'll help you move to a different town so you can disengage, literally disengage from the group. Because a lot of these people marry in the group or have a lover in the group, have their job somehow affiliated with other group members. So it's hard to leave. And you've been narrowed down to this extremist focus where they tell you these are the only friends you should have. So a couple people in our sample had moved to Idaho to live in white supremacist colonies. And, if you try to leave, you're leaving your whole life. So exit programs give you therapy, help you work through the ideology and see, what the holes in it are and why it's not serving you and it's not going to serve anybody else. Helps you protect yourself, helps you renew your life. And I'm really proud, and I shouldn't claim any pride in it other than TM is on our staff, but TM Garrett started something called Erasing the Hate. And that's for white supremacists that have literally indelibly signed on their bodies Nazi flags, things like that, as far as tattoos. And those people find that they get a lot of strange reactions once they try to re-enter mainstream society, and they feel a lot of shame and they feel fear because they can get beat up for that.
Yes.
And so he helps. He's made a lot of arrangements with tattoo artists around the country and internationally that agree if somebody is referred for tattoo cover-up or tattoo removal, that it'll be done at no cost.
Fantastic.
It is really cool.
That's cool. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
How is the Defense Department using what are they what are they asking for specifically, and how are they using it within?
Well, Secretary Austin had his stand down days, so I spoke for 2 of them. But the stand down days for the 2 that I took part in were a lot about talking about the military's policy on extremism, that Oath Keepers and 3 Percenters were groups that you literally are not allowed to be part of, and what the rules are, that because the military allows you to be part of a group but not show up in uniform or not support it in any way. So they went through all the nuances of that. They talked about some issues of counter-protesting. But to me, they didn't get to the real issues of if you have extremists in your ranks, and we know that they do, and we know that most of the militaries in the Western world, this is a real issue, that police and military are being infiltrated by white supremacists. In our sample, okay, it's not random, but if in a sample of 51, you hear over and over again, we tried to send people into the military, we tried to get military members, we did recruit military members, we had active duty, or we had vets that joined us, and then we had them give the trainings. And they came across as very patriotic, so they lent a patriotic air to our group. So, young kids that were joining were like, okay, this must be legit, and it's cool, and I want to be part of it. So in our view, they were only scratching the surface, and we put in a proposal, and we're still waiting for our contract to be signed, to say we'll help you figure out how to message in the military about extremism. We'll help you figure out when a commander finds an extremist, because they said, it was really up to the commander to decide how he was going to deal with it. If he was, but it sounded to me like if it's a bad case, they just eject you, which isn't fair to the rest of society, because all these people have gone through weapons training. They've gone through basic training. And, if you just eject them and you do zero treatment, well, then it's our problem. It's not the military's problem anymore. And
That's a good point.
Yeah, so our advice and what we said we would help work on is helping the mental health people to understand this, to treat it, and to maybe start thinking about it as a sickness of a type of, like alcoholism, all the things that do happen in the military, PTSD, where commanders are taught to recognize it and do something about it really early on, catch it early, treat it, and retain your forces. I mean, somebody really, that's engaging in violent acts, no, of course not. They've got to be sent out, but maybe sent out with some treatment before they're, totally ejected. And then you also have to think about, if this is a problem in the military, which we know it is, people around that person aren't going to be very likely to report it if they think their buddy's going to get ejected. But if they think their buddy's going to get some kind of thoughtful treatment that maybe turn them back to the rest of the group, they're going to be much more supportive of reporting mechanisms.
That raises a question. There were both past and present members of the armed services, various branches, as well as law enforcement at the Capitol on January 6th.
Mm-hmm.
Were you able to interview anyone who had been in the service or in law enforcement?
Not yet. Oh yeah. Well, not of the January 6th, but we have one video that I did show in the stand down days, because we already had it made. And this is what we've told them that we can make a lot more of for them. It was a guy that was in the military, and he got kicked out. He was Aryan Nations. He got kicked out, no treatment whatsoever. And he went on to, I think he told me he ran over a black man and he attacked a synagogue. And so, foisting the danger out on the rest of us. So there's a good example of a mistake. But, should they keep him in the military when he's, going to protests and screaming white power? No. So, we can't have that either. I mean, minorities in the military and minorities all through the US and white people too that don't support that, we don't deserve that. So it should definitely be reprehended and stopped. But, we need to think about, did we just stop and shift it to some other venue? Because if these guys are kicked out of the military, then they're perfect for the white supremacists to scoop up. And we also talked to Jason Van Tatenhove from the Oath Keepers, and he said Stewart was really good at recruiting military, and special forces guys would come in and do trainings for them. So I think that the special forces guys didn't stay with the Oath Keepers long, according to Jason, and they were paid something for doing the trainings. But still, they were training a militia that was saying that as military members that they had sworn to uphold the Constitution, and now they're training a militia that might attack this country and did attack this country. I mean, the Oath Keepers were in stack formation going up the steps of the Capitol, and they're now been charged with sedition.
Yes.
So all of these groups had military members in them, and police. Some were active duty, some were vets, and we're working on expanding our sample of interviewing them. The active duty, of course, are going to be really hard to get them to talk because they've got a lot to lose if they talk.
Yes.
But we're always really careful with people's identities, and really
you have to be.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's the FBI and Department of Homeland Services, Homeland Security, and I believe it was the Phoenix FBI office had put out for law enforcement an intelligence bulletin. It's been maybe 4 or 5 years ago, in which they warned then that they were seeing infiltration of, or deliberate infiltration of, and trying to recruit past and present members of the military.
Well, that's because these people believe that they're eventually going to take over the government, and they need the military, and they need the police. And there's we're working on a paper right now. We went just open source and looked up all the cases that we could find of military and police members, and looking at what does that look like, and then comparing it with what our sample told us. And they're not hard to find. There's lots of them.
There are.
But like we just discussed, before we went to recording, about this National Guard member. I think he was ex-National Guard, but he was a member of the base. Or said he was. Or said he was a member.
That's an interesting group because I off the top of my head, I can't remember the founder's name. I believe it was in 2018 or 2019 when this guy founded it. And there was an FBI. The FBI had been monitoring the group, and I believe they arrested a number of the base's members. 2019, I think, at which time the founder, who was married to a Russian-born woman living in the United States, they moved to St. Petersburg, St. Petersburg, Russia, where they have been ever since. Which raises a lot of interesting questions. I know some counterintelligence folks have told me they suspect that he is probably an FSB asset.
Probably. And
he, DHS is
maybe not even knowing that he is.
Then he would be a useful idiot. But he's smart enough, I think, that he probably does. And he still seems to be running the organization, because this gentleman that you referred to, this National Guard, ex-National Guard member, he had been communicating with this gentleman and other members of the group via encrypted online capabilities. Of course, the FBI was able to crack it. This guy's still operating the group from Russia.
The Russians have always been really good at disinformation. I mean, we caught up to them eventually, but they're masters of it, and they're masters at divide and conquer. And, everybody that knows anything about intel knows that, of course, the Russians are playing games in our country and in Western Europe, and this is a great way to play it. If you can amplify the messages of white supremacists, you're stirring up conflict and, pushing us towards civil strife. And if you can help these people spread their fascist message, doesn't mean that the Russians believe any of it. They just know that it's detrimental to us. And we saw the same thing with QAnon. I don't believe QAnon was created by the Russians, but the Russians definitely amplified it. And I think that's well known that, there were Russian trolls amplifying Q's message.
What's the best way that you, based on all of your research, for being able to provide exit ramps? I mean, how do you see, what needs to be done to provide better exit ramps for people?
I think we need, I would love it if we were involved in some level, like there could be federal things that are, showing that this isn't a good thing, and, like through our videos, that kind of thing, but then push you towards the help you need. So we have a website that our videos take you to, an Escape Hate website, and then it tells you where you can get help. Takes you to that landing page, actually, where you can get help. But DHS really needs to be funding comprehensive, well thought out exit programs, and that's or states too, that that function well. And because people in our sample told us, I tried to go to a psychologist and the psychologist wouldn't see me. She said, I know what group you belong to. I refuse to treat you. Or they saw tattoos and they got scared. But the ones that did manage to get psychotherapy, it really did help them. But I know from working with T.M. Garrett, he's on our staff, but he also does intervention work informally. So nobody pays him for it. He's just willing to help other white supremacists exit. He used to be KKK. And, these people call at 11 o'clock at night and say, I have a parole hearing tomorrow. And, they know I violated the law because I left the state. And what am I going to do? Or I don't have any more money. I need $100 to buy groceries. And, those aren't things that would typically be well handled in psychotherapy, because usually psychotherapy is, once, twice a week. And, a lot of these people wouldn't have insurance to cover it. So those are things we need to think about. They usually have kind of overwhelming needs. So exit groups need to be stood up all across the country so that, people know who to call. They can call and talk to them. If it's not a good match, they can call a different exit program and, get, it's kind of like suicide hotlines. You can't just have your appointment at 4 o'clock on Monday and it's going to take care of you if you're suicidal. You might need a lot more intensive help.
Is anyone doing this in any of the states now? Or is DHS working on a program? I'm not aware of any.
I think DHS has gotten the idea that it's got to be decentralized, and they're trying to help. They've had proposals to help local initiatives, and I don't know if those who got the funding for them. We applied for some, but we're not local, and we don't do the actual intervention because it's just too time consuming, and we're more researchers and putting out helpful materials and, analyzing and putting out policy papers that will help policymakers. But I know Jeff Shoup, he left the NSM, and some people don't trust him, but he seems like he's a good actor and trying to help people exit. And since he was such a leader of such a big group, a lot of people from his group called him and talked to him about it and said, I see you left, like, what the hell? And, then he's not a social worker by any means, but, he knows his membership. He knows how they think, his ex-membership. And he tries to work with them to exit, but he hasn't gotten any funding. T.M. Garrett had a group called Change, and I think he was just, running on spare change. And I think there's... Well, I'd have to pull up our website because we have all the places where you can get help in the U.S. that we're aware of. And There's one that got a DHS grant a while back under Trump, and then it was pulled. But people were really angry that it got pulled. Then they got private funding because other people stood in and gave them private funding. And they may be doing the best work. But usually these exit programs like that, have group work, help you relocate, help you with your legal problems, help you, with a lot of informal counseling on an as-needed basis, telephone calls. You can call up distressed and get help.
Yeah. And there are links to your website for our viewers in the description below.
Well, they can find an awful lot of papers there. We're pretty prolific on writing. And if you go to our YouTube channel, you can watch our videos.
There's so much in this to cover. It's hard to cover in a short period of time. But there's been some interesting points made. I appreciate you coming on, Ann. It's been very informative. Is there anything outstanding that you haven't got across that you would like to?
I don't know if it's that important, but we did find another concept that I thought was really interesting, and we named it projected hate. Well, there's two things: that projected hate, and we found this with ISIS too, and Al Qaeda, that. In most societies, being LGBTQ is not accepted. And the less accepted it is in your family and your surrounds, the more you're going to hide it and maybe have some sense of self-hatred over that identification. And what was amazing to us is that our sample of 51 was way overrepresented with people that were either LGBTQ themselves or talked about close relationships in the group with people that were LGBTQ. And I found that really interesting. And the ones that were themselves, there were two different things, and we called them different variants of what we call projected hate. And there's this concept in psychology where if something is an anathema to you, maybe your parents didn't like that about you,
Mm-hmm.
you hate it in yourself and you try to split it off from yourself and disavow it. And then when you see it in others, you try to destroy them. So you take all your anger and project it onto another person. And, white supremacist groups are really known for being hateful to the LGBTQ community. So it's strange that people that had that would join. But I think that was the phenomenon of what was going on. And then, over time they had an awakening and realized, it really is okay who I am and what I am and how I express myself sexually. And, I don't need to hate myself anymore, and I don't need to engage in that. And then we also had people that I think believed that they would be the exception. And I did see this in one guy a black guy that had joined a white supremacist group in the UK. This is years back. And he said they were beating up Pakistanis a lot. And one day they beat up a black guy and he was just like appalled. And he said, I can't be part of this group anymore. And his friend said, why not? And he goes, I'm black. And they're like, no, you're not. But he was black as night. And, but that people can believe that they're going to be the exception, and, that they can attack the other members of their group in a way. It's, it's a bit incomprehensible unless you understand the whole projection process.
Yeah. Have you found a lot of that?
Yeah.
Really? That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting now, too. I found a news article that said more and more Hispanics are joining white supremacist groups. And in our country, there was this whole transition of what group got to be considered white. Irish, they used to be called Black Irish, Greeks, Italians. So if you can, force yourself into the white group and you find that advantageous, it's sad, but it is something that happens, and it's got an ugly side to it that it can, this whole process of projected hate can then occur. And I guess the other thing that two other things that I would say with our ISIS sample, we found this phenomena that we named spontaneous de-radicalization. And that's when people de-radicalize just as on their own without a program. And a lot of times it's because the group disappoints them. The leaders disappoint them. I mean, I know people that were in the NSM that said, we were told to stay away from all minorities, but I knew, at least 3 leaders that were sleeping with Black women. And, or they didn't like the violence, so they didn't like the extreme violence, things like that. So we first named this concept with our ISIS sample because, over in Syria, the detainees are crammed into rooms. They get about 1.5 square meter of space each. So they're like sardines in a room, but they're all talking to each other. And so when they got put in prison, they might have been pretty pro-ISIS. They were serving the group still, but they had their doubts and they had their disappointments with ISIS. But now when they're in a group of 30 or 50 guys, and everybody's telling their stories of disappointment and disillusionment, they just start to de-radicalize. And it's really kind of a cool phenomena. And then, there's the whole issue of, is de-radicalization what we should be aiming for, or just disengagement? And I definitely think we should be aiming for de-radicalization, because otherwise people slip back and forth into these groups.
Is it just like a eureka moment that they have? What's the impetus, the driving factor behind sudden de-radicalization? That's interesting if that's happening.
A lot of times with the white supremacists, it was an interaction with a minority member that was positive. So, one guy told me I never ever mixed with minorities because we weren't supposed to mix, and I hated minorities. But when I was far away from my group, because I was a truck driver and we were unloading, this Black guy was unloading with me, and he started telling me about his family, and I just realized we have so much in common, and that he's a human being just like me. Or this guy was not in our sample, but Arno Michaelis, he's from my home state of Wisconsin, and he had tattooed on his fingers, I don't know if it was Rojo, I don't know what he had tattooed on his fingers, but he said he would routinely go into a McDonald's, and it was the same clerk, a Black girl, and he would give her his money, and she would give him change, and she would always see his hands, and she was just polite to him. And he said that just got to him, started wearing him down. And I know TM, when he does interventions, he just recently took a former military guy, somebody that when he got out of the military felt really lost and joined the KKK. He took him to dinner at a Jewish family's house, and this former KKK, former military member, is extremely conservative, is very against LGBT issues, is very against abortion being legalized, is very fiscally conservative. And he sat down with a group of Jews that agreed with him. And it blew his mind. And he said, "Oh, they're not all libtards."
So their conscience kicks in, so to speak.
Or people get rehumanized to them that have been dehumanized by the group. Because in this directed hate process, they're taught to dehumanize minorities and to dehumanize Jews and see Jews and minorities as their enemies.
What do you see looking over the horizon?
I get really worried. I mean, I know it's not a popular thing to say in some groups, but I get really worried about the easy accessibility of weapons, and that if people are getting pulled down rabbit holes, conspiracy theories, believing that they need to take it into their hands to enforce their values,
yes,
and they don't believe in the political process anymore, that we're going to at the least have a lot more lethal killings, because white supremacists believe that they should do synagogue and black church shootings and shootings in general to incite Rahowa. Accelerationists believe, they're like just typical anarchists, that we should destabilize society and tear it all down, start something new. Their vision oftentimes is it'll be something new and white. When I was hearing from Antifa that they are also arming, I thought, geez, there's just too many people believing that they have to be the enforcers and that they've got the guns to do it.
Antifa, I wanted to ask you a question about the other side of the spectrum, because I slowly started seeing a resurgence of the kinds of leftist Marxist socialist groups that we had back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, like Students for Democratic Society, Simeonese Liberation Army, the Weather Underground. You had the Bader Meinhof gang in Europe, the Red Brigade. There's a resurgence of that as well. Have you had an opportunity to talk to any of those besides the one Antifa?
It was 5 Antifa, and I hope to grow that sample, but that's a matter of trust, and it's scary for them to trust. They were telling me that they're doxxed, but they feel very strongly that our laws and our law enforcement is not doing the job, so they need to do the job, and that's worrisome. And abortion clinic terrorists felt the same way. I can see how people get to that mindset of, I need to enforce it because nobody else is going to. But we're just going to have anarchy and violence if Americans and other Westerners believe that they're the enforcers, and we no longer trust our legal process, our democratic process, our legislative process, and our law enforcement process.
It seems like by you saying that and kind of following that train of thought, it seems that these are the people who are very strongly driven by either ideology without a spiritual component, or a very religious component. I mean, they're strongly driven by one of those, or both combined.
I think when they go through the ideological indoctrination process, they do get basically brainwashed. It's like a cult. They get isolated from other information. They're told, don't believe anybody but us, only believe these sources, don't mix with others but us. And it's basically going down a rabbit hole. But I don't think that the drive is ideological. I think the drive is, I really need something. So that oath keeper that's, coming with his automatic rifle slung across his chest probably likes feeling like a real man. And he's got his buddies, and they're all side by side, and they're claiming to defend the Constitution or constitutional rights. And, doesn't that sound noble and good and manly? And then imagine, if you have.
I guess I can see that point of view. To me, it sounds crazy.
It does, but imagine you're the gay guy in the group and you're hiding it. And, now you've got this rifle slung across your chest, and you got your brothers, and you got your belonging. Or imagine you're the kid that grew up with your mom that overdosed on heroin, and now you're a member of the Proud Boys, and they put it on YouTube, and it got millions of views when you joined. You're important. You're special. We're going to see a lot more violence. I think that would be my prediction. And I don't know if it'll be catastrophic, but we're going to see a lot more violence. Although, it's like the Me Too movement. I mean, when we were seeing gun violence every single day, people just, are saying, do something to our legislators.
So I advise our listeners, the website is below, as well as finding a lot of videos, academic papers, peer-reviewed papers, content. And thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. It's something that, you could go hours and hours and hours on, but I felt it was important to address.
You're welcome.
I appreciate you coming on.
And hopefully in the fall, my book will come out. And
yes.
Yeah.
And the title of it is it again?
Homegrown Hate.
Homegrown Hate. Yeah. I look forward to reading it when it comes out.
Yeah. When I get it, I'll send it to you and you can link it to this podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. That wraps up another episode of Homeland Security Off the Record. We'll see you the next time.